My parents told people I was dead. Not missing, not estranged, dead. For 8 years they returned my letters unopened, changed their numbers and erased me from family photos like I'd never existed. Then one morning, my name appeared on a Forbes list. 5 hours later, my mother texted me for the first time in nearly a decade. But her message wasn't an apology, it was a warning. And attached was a photograph of someone I'd been told died years ago. Someone who was very much alive. And terrified. What I discovered next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the danger I was actually in. My name is Lauren Hale, and I'm 49 years old now, living in Santa Monica, where the ocean sounds nothing like the silence I grew up in. People ask me all the time how I built my company from nothing, how I made it onto Forbes, how I survived in tech when so many women don't. But the real question, the one that keeps me up at night, isn't how I survived success. It's how I survived my family. The story I need to tell you didn't start the day my parents stopped speaking to me. It didn't start when my mother blocked my number or when my father told relatives I was dead to them. It started decades earlier in a cramped colonial house in Millfield, Ohio, where the wallpaper was peeling and the rules were absolute. Where I learned that love wasn't something you earned through excellence. It was something you kept by staying small. My mother, Margaret Hale, had a smile that could freeze water. She was a church secretary, impeccable in her pressed skirts, and her judgment. My father, Charles, managed a hardware store and believed that a man's word was law, especially in his own home. They had clear ideas about what made a proper family, a proper daughter. I was supposed to be soft-spoken, helpful, modest. I was supposed to make them look good at church socials and family dinners. I was supposed to understand that my brother Matt mattered more. Matt with his football scholarships and his effortless charm. Matt, who could do no wrong, even when he did everything wrong. He was 3 years older and he knew his place at the top of our family hierarchy. I knew mine too. I was the shadow, the good girl, the one who set the table and cleared the plates and never asked why. Then there was Lee. My cousin Lee moved in when I was 9. After her mother, my Aunt Diane, died from an overdose in a Super 8 motel outside Cleveland. Lee was 12, angry and afraid of everything. My parents took her in because it was the Christian thing to do and because my grandmother Evelyn insisted. Evelyn lived with us too, in the converted sunroom, watching everything from her armchair like a sentinel. She had opinions about everything and everyone listened, especially my mother. Lee and I shared a bedroom with twin beds and a dresser we split down the middle. She cried every night for the first month. I held her hand across the gap between our beds until she fell asleep. We became something closer than sisters. We became survivors of the same house. And then there was Noah Reyes. He lived 4 doors down in a house, with a sagging porch and a mother who worked double shifts at the hospital. Noah was my age, skinny and brown-eyed and obsessed with astronomy. He told me once that I was like a supernova, all this energy compressed into something small, waiting to explode into brilliance. I was 11 years old, and no one had ever said anything like that to me. I started to believe that maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't supposed to stay small forever. That same year, everything shifted. It was late August, humid and thick. The kind of night where you can't sleep, so you wander. I couldn't find my favorite book, the one about Marie Curie that Noah had given me for my birthday. I thought maybe I'd left it in the attic where I sometimes hid to read. The attic was my secret place, dusty and forgotten, filled with boxes of Christmas decorations and old photo albums. I climbed the stairs carefully, trying not to make the wood creak. That's when I heard them. My parents, their voices rising through the floorboards from their bedroom directly below. I froze on the attic landing, my hand on a cardboard box, my heart suddenly pounding. My mother's voice was sharp, angry in a way I rarely heard. She said my name, Lauren. Then she said something that didn't make sense. She said, "We should have told her the truth years ago." My father's voice was lower, harder to hear, but I caught fragments. Better she never knows. It would destroy everything. My mother again, frustrated now. "She's going to find out eventually, Charles." What happens then? I pressed my ear to the floor, barely breathing. Find out what truth? My father said something about a box, about papers that needed to stay hidden. He said, "Evelyn made us promise. We keep the secret or we lose everything." I didn't understand. Not then. But I knew instinctively that whatever they were hiding, it was about me. I started searching the attic, quietly, frantically pulling at boxes in the dark. And tucked behind a stack of old tax returns, I found it. A small lockbox, the kind you'd keep documents in. It wasn't locked. Inside were papers. Official-looking papers. A birth certificate that had my name on it, but not their names as parents. There was a photograph too. A woman I didn't recognize holding a baby. Me, I was 11 years old. Kneeling on a dirty attic floor, holding proof that Margaret and Charles Hale weren't my real parents. And in that moment, I realized something that would shape everything that came after. I wasn't invisible in this family. I was being erased. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Lee's soft breathing from across the room, replaying those words over and over. We can't let her think she has potential. Better she believes she's average. Adoption file. The words felt like shards of glass in my chest, sharp and wrong and impossible to ignore. I was 11 years old and my entire life had just fractured into before and after. Before I knew I was a lie. After I understood nothing about me was real. But I couldn't ask them. I couldn't let them know I'd heard. Some instinct, some survival mechanism I didn't even know I possessed, told me that knowledge was dangerous. That if they knew I knew, something terrible would happen. So, I did what I'd always done. I stayed quiet. I became smaller. I watched. It was Thanksgiving week, November 1987, and the house smelled like cinnamon and roasting turkey, but everything tasted like ash to me. My mother moved through the kitchen with her usual precision, her hands quick and efficient as she prepared dishes for the church potluck. My father sat in his recliner watching football, shouting at the television like the players could hear him. Matt was home from his first semester of college, full of stories about fraternity parties and professors who loved him. Lee helped my mother in the kitchen, quiet and obedient, the way we'd both learned to be, and I sat at the dining table pretending to do homework. But really, I was watching my parents, searching their faces for some sign of the truth. Who was I? Where did I come from? And who was the her my father had mentioned, the one I supposedly took after, the one who had left them? Every time my mother looked at me that week, I wondered what she saw. Did she see a daughter or a responsibility? Did she see me or someone else, someone she was trying to erase? I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. How I didn't look like anyone in our family. Matt had my father's square jaw, my mother's thin nose. I had dark curly hair where theirs was straight and light. I had green eyes where theirs were blue or brown. Even Lee, who wasn't blood related, fit better than I did. She had that same Midwestern plainness my mother valued. I looked different. I'd always looked different. How had I never questioned it? 3 days after Thanksgiving, I woke up around 2 in the morning, my throat dry and scratchy. I needed water. The house was dark and silent as I crept down the hallway toward the stairs. That's when I heard them again. My parents whispering behind the attic door at the end of the hall. The attic door that was usually closed but now stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. I should have gone back to bed. I should have gotten my water and pretended I heard nothing. But I didn't. I moved closer, pressing myself against the wall, barely breathing. My mother's voice came first, tight with anxiety. "Charles, we can't let her think she has potential. If she starts believing she's special, she'll want more than this life. She'll start asking questions." My father's response was low and firm. "Better she believes she's average. Margaret, better she thinks she's just like everyone else here. If she finds out who she really takes after, if she learns the truth about her, she'll leave us like her mother did. She thinks she's entitled to more." My mother made a sound, something between agreement and fear. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of metal on wood, a box being shut, a lock clicking into place. My mother's voice again, barely audible. "Seal the adoption file properly this time. She never needs to know. Not about the file, not about who her mother was, not about any of it. We promised Evelyn we'd keep her ordinary. We promised we'd keep her here." I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The pain was the only thing that kept me from screaming, from running into that attic and demanding answers. Adoption file. Her mother? Keep her ordinary. The words circled in my head like vultures. I backed away slowly, carefully, and somehow made it to the bathroom where I locked the door and sat on the cold tile floor, shaking. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The shock was too enormous for tears. I just sat there in the dark, hugging my knees, trying to understand what it meant that the people I called Mom and Dad had deliberately chosen to make me believe I was less than I was. That they were hiding something about my real mother, something so significant they'd locked it away and made promises to keep me from ever knowing. The next morning, I walked past the attic door on my way to breakfast. There was a new lock on it. Shiny silver, professional looking, the kind that required a key. It hadn't been there the day before. My father must have installed it in the night, after I'd gone back to bed. The message was clear. Whatever was in that attic, whatever truth they were protecting, it was locked away now, permanently. I sat down at the breakfast table and my mother put a plate of eggs in front of me, her smile tight and controlled. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't spent the night ensuring I'd never learn who I really was. I ate my eggs and said nothing. I was getting very good at saying nothing. 2 days later, on a gray Monday morning, I walked to Noah's house to see if he wanted to walk to school together, like we always did. But when I got there, the driveway was full of boxes. A moving truck sat at the curb, its back doors open, swallowing furniture and lives. Noah's mother was directing movers, her face drawn and tired. I ran up to Noah, who was sitting on the porch steps looking miserable. "What's happening?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "You didn't tell me you were moving." He looked at me with something like guilt in his eyes. "It happened fast," he said. "My mom got a job offer in Arizona. We're leaving today." Today. I couldn't breathe. Noah was my only friend. The only person who'd ever made me feel like I mattered. He stood up and gave me this awkward, terrible hug. "You're going to do amazing things, Lauren," he whispered. "Don't let them make you small." Then his mother called him and he got in the car and they drove away. Just like that. No real goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. I found out years later, decades later really, why they'd left so suddenly. But standing there on that cold November sidewalk, watching Noah's car disappear around the corner, I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I walked to school in a daze. I sat through classes hearing nothing. I came home and did my homework and set the table for dinner and played the role of the good, average, unremarkable daughter. But inside, I was changing. Inside, I was becoming someone else. Someone who understood that the people who were supposed to love me most had built my entire life on a lie, and somewhere, locked in a metal box in our attic, was the truth about who I really was. I promised myself that one day I would open that box. One day I would know. But when I finally did, when I finally held those papers in my hands and read the names and saw the photographs, the truth wasn't at all what I expected. It was so much worse than I could have possibly imagined. I left home at 19 with 2 suitcases, a partial scholarship to Ohio State, and a heart full of quiet rage. My parents stood on the porch and watched me load my beat-up Honda Civic without saying goodbye. My mother's arms were crossed, her face a mask of disappointment. My father just shook his head slowly like I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Matt was there too, home for the weekend, and he called out as I started the engine. "You're throwing away this family for what, Lauren? To prove something? You'll be back in 6 months." I didn't answer. I just drove. I didn't know then that it would be the last real conversation I'd have with any of them for years. The scholarship they mentioned, the one that got me out, became family legend as the scholarship I'd stolen from Matt. Never mind that Matt had already graduated. Never mind that it was a merit-based award for women in STEM that he couldn't have applied for anyway. My mother told everyone at church that I'd manipulated the system, that I'd always been cunning that way, that she didn't know where I got it from. The lie spread through Millfield like wildfire. Lauren Hale, the ungrateful daughter who'd robbed her own brother of opportunities, I heard about it through Lee, who called me during my first semester, her voice dripping with false concern. "People are talking, Lauren. You're making the family look bad. Maybe you should come home and apologize." I didn't go home. Not for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas, not for spring break. I worked 3 jobs that first year, slinging coffee at dawn, shelving library books in the afternoon, cleaning office buildings at night. I fell asleep and studied carols. I ate ramen until I couldn't stand the smell anymore. I learned that being alone wasn't the same as being free, but it was close enough. And I learned something else too. I was good at things, really good. Professors noticed me. I won a coding competition. I built a prototype app that tracked campus safety in real time, and the university actually implemented it. For the first time in my life, people looked at me and saw potential instead of obligation. By the time I was 23, I'd graduated with honors and moved to Cleveland, where tech jobs were starting to bloom. That's where I met Ethan Myers. He was bartending at a place near my apartment. All charm and easy smiles and the kind of attention I'd been starving for my whole life. He told me I was brilliant. He told me I was beautiful. He told me my dreams of building something meaningful were cute. I should have heard the condescension in that word. Cute. Like my ambitions were a puppy trick. Entertaining, but ultimately meaningless. But I was 24 and lonely, and I'd never had someone look at me the way Ethan did. So I married him 6 months later in a courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses. We pulled off the street. My family didn't come to the wedding. I didn't invite them. By then, we'd settled into a cold détente. The occasional obligatory phone call on birthdays. Conversations that never went deeper than weather and work. They'd made it clear I'd disappointed them by leaving. I'd made it clear I didn't need their approval anymore. It was almost peaceful. That distance, almost. Ethan and I lasted 5 years. 5 years of him coming home late smelling like perfume, that wasn't mine. 5 years of him telling me my ideas were impractical, my goals unrealistic, my belief in myself delusional. The night I found him in bed with a coworker from the bar, he didn't even apologize. He sat on the edge of our bed, naked and unbothered, and told me the truth as he saw it. "You'll never become anything, Lauren. You're too soft. You don't have what it takes. You should probably just find a normal job and accept who you are." I believed him. That's the worst part. I actually believed him for a while. I was 33 years old, divorced, living in a studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling, working a soul-crushing job at a data entry firm. I'd stopped coding. I'd stopped dreaming. I'd become exactly what my parents had always wanted me to be. Average, forgettable, safe. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was hitting rock bottom. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was the memory of 11-year-old me, finding that box in the attic and realizing I'd spent my whole life being erased. Whatever it was, I started coding again. Late nights after work, teaching myself new languages, new frameworks, building prototypes of an idea that wouldn't leave me alone. HomeLink, a platform that used AI to coordinate elderly home care, matching patients with caregivers, managing medications, scheduling appointments, all integrated into one seamless system. I'd watched my grandmother Evelyn deteriorate in that sunroom, overwhelmed by a medical system that treated her like a number. I knew there had to be a better way. I worked on HomeLink obsessively for 3 years. I showed it to anyone who would look. Most people shrugged. Investors told me the market was too niche. Tech bros at meets told me it wasn't sexy enough. My family, the few times I mentioned it in our increasingly rare phone calls, said nothing at all. Then I moved to Los Angeles. I was 38 years old with $1,500 in savings and a prototype that barely worked. I applied to every incubator, every accelerator, every program that would take applications. I got rejected 47 times. I counted. And then TechRise, a small incubator in Culver City, said yes. They gave me 3 months, a tiny stipend, and access to mentors who actually understood what I was trying to build. That's where I met Dr. Sienna Ward. Sienna was a former Stanford professor turned advisor, sharp as broken glass and twice as cutting. She tore apart my first 3 presentations so thoroughly I cried in the bathroom afterward. But then she sat with me for 4 hours and helped me rebuild everything from the ground up. She was the first person who ever treated my ideas like they mattered, like I mattered. Jace Kim came next. He was a cybersecurity expert doing consulting work for TechRise, Korean American, brilliant, and weirdly invested in making sure HomeLink didn't get hacked into oblivion before it launched. He became my closest confidant, the person I called at 2 a.m. when the code wouldn't work. When investors said no when I wanted to quit, he never let me quit. And then there was the anonymous supporter who started emailing me 6 months into development. Short messages of encouragement, occasional technical suggestions that were always right, small donations to our crowdfunding campaign. I never knew who Winterglass was. I never knew why they cared, but those emails kept me going on the days when nothing else could. HomeLink started growing, slowly at first, then faster. Pilot programs in 3 cities, partnerships with hospitals, a waiting list of families desperate for better care coordination. By the time I was 42, we were raising Series A funding, real money. Real investors? Real validation that this thing I'd built from nothing in a studio apartment was actually valuable. That's when my family heard, not from me. I'd stopped trying to tell them anything years before. They heard through gossip, through the Millfield rumor mill, through some cousin who'd seen an article online. My father told my aunt, loud enough that she'd repeat it, Lauren needs to accept she peaked at birth. She'll never be a Hale success story. This tech thing is just another fantasy. She failed like she always does. I didn't hear about it directly. Lee told me months later at the family Christmas reunion I'd agreed to attend for the first time in 6 years. I don't know why I went. Maybe I wanted to prove something. Maybe I was still that 11-year-old girl desperate for their approval. Maybe I was just stupid. The reunion was at my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in. Now updated with new furniture, but the same suffocating atmosphere. Everyone was there. Matt, now a detective, engaged to Emily Grafton, who worked in PR and treated gossip like currency. Aunt Valerie, my mother's sister, who'd married into serious money and never let anyone forget it. Pastor Ron, still my mother's spiritual advisor, still dispensing judgment disguised as wisdom. And Lee, married to a hedge fund manager, dripping in diamonds. Smug in her success that came from marrying right. Instead of working hard, they paraded their accomplishments like trophies before dinner. Matt's commendations. Valerie's new vacation home. Lee's husband's latest acquisition. My mother beamed at all of it, hostessing with the perfect blend of pride and humility. I sat on the couch near the tree, nursing a glass of wine, feeling like I was watching a performance I'd never been cast in. Then Lee turned to me, her smile sharp and performative. Still pretending to be a tech CEO, Lauren? How's that going? The room got quieter. Aunt Valerie leaned in, stage whispering to Pastor Ron but making sure I could hear. Poor thing. She always did have delusions of grandeur. Remember when she thought she'd be a scientist? Now it's computers. Pastor Ron patted my hand with greasy fingers. Ambition is a sin when it outpaces humility. Dear, perhaps it's time to consider a simpler path. I looked at my parents. My mother was rearranging cookies on a platter, her face carefully neutral. My father stood by the fireplace, looking at me like I was a stain on their holiday tablecloth. An embarrassment they had to tolerate because I'd shown up. Neither of them said a word in my defense. They didn't need to. Their silence said everything. And then the front door opened. My mother looked up, confused because everyone who'd been invited was already here. A man stepped inside, tall and confident in an expensive coat, snow dusting his shoulders. Lee's champagne glass actually slipped in her hand. She caught it just before it fell, because the man standing in my parents' doorway, shaking snow from his hair and looking around the room with casual authority, was Marcus Chen. And Marcus Chen was so famous in Silicon Valley that even my technologically illiterate family knew exactly who he was. I stared at the man in my parents' doorway, and my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Not Marcus Chen. Alexander Rhodes. Alexander Rhodes. The Alexander Rhodes. The man who'd built Vertex Technologies from a dorm room startup into an empire that touched nearly every smartphone in America. His apps powered communication for millions. His net worth was somewhere in the billions, and he was standing in my childhood home in Millfield, Ohio, snow melting on his shoulders, looking directly at me. Everyone froze. Matt's confident posture crumpled. Aunt Valerie's mouth hung open. Lee looked like she'd been slapped. Emily's fingers were already moving toward her phone, Instagram reflexes kicking in, ready to document this impossible moment. Pastor Ron stood up from his chair, confused and territorial. My mother's wine glass trembled in her hand, dark liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. And my father went completely white, like he'd seen a ghost he'd spent decades trying to bury. Alexander moved through the room with the ease of someone who owned every space he entered. He walked past Matt without a glance. He ignored Aunt Valerie's stammered greeting. He stepped around the coffee table and the carefully arranged plates of cookies and stopped directly in front of me. His eyes were dark and searching, and there was something in them that looked almost like recognition. "Lauren Hale," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice carried through the suddenly silent room like a bell. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Why was Alexander Rhodes in my parents' house? Why did he know my name? How did he even know where to find me? My mother made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. My father took a step forward, his hand outstretched like he was trying to stop something that had already been set in motion. "No," he whispered. "Just that, no." Alexander turned his head slightly, acknowledging my father's presence with the barest flicker of attention, then looked back at me. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks," he said. "Your email, your phone, your office, nothing went through. Then Winterglass told me you'd stopped replying to messages entirely. Said you might be here, Winterglass." The word hit me like electricity. My anonymous mentor, the person who'd sent encouraging emails and technical advice and small donations when Homelink was barely surviving, the person who'd believed in me when no one else did. "You're Winterglass," I said, my voice barely working. Alexander shook his head. "No, but I know who is, and they asked me to find you. They asked me to make sure you got something you should have had years ago." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. It was thick, bound with string, the kind of folder that holds documents you're not supposed to lose. Heavy and official and terrifying. I recognized it immediately. Not the specific folder, but the weight of it. The shape? It was exactly like the box I'd found in the attic when I was 11. My hands shook as I took it from him. Everyone in the room was staring now. Matt had moved closer, protective instincts warring with confusion. Lee looked hungry, desperate to know what was happening. Aunt Valerie was whispering to Pastor Ron, but I couldn't focus on any of them. I could only focus on the folder in my hands and the way my father had gone from white to gray, like he was dying in real time. "Don't," my mother said sharply. "Lauren, don't open that. Not here. Not now." But I was already opening it. My fingers found the string, pulled it loose, lifted the cover. Inside were documents. Old documents yellowed at the edges, official seals and signatures and legal language. Adoption papers? My adoption papers? The ones I'd never seen. The ones that had been locked away in the attic. The ones my parents had promised each other I'd never find. And beneath the papers, a manila envelope. My name was written on it in handwriting I recognized instantly. Evelyn's handwriting. My grandmother's careful, spidery script. For Lauren, it said, to be opened on her 18th birthday. I was 44 years old. I'd missed that deadline by My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the envelope. Alexander reached out, steadied my wrist gently. "Take your time," he said quietly, "but you should read it. All of it." I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, letters, and more legal documents. The photographs came first. A young woman, maybe 25, with dark curly hair and green eyes, and a smile that looked exactly like mine. She was holding a baby. Me. She was holding me. There were more photos. Her laughing. Her serious. Her sitting at a desk covered in papers and books, clearly working on something complex. Her with a man I didn't recognize. Her alone, looking at the camera like she was trying to send a message across time. The letters were next. Dozens of them. one for each birthday from when I was born until I was 18. Each envelope marked with a year. "Dear Lauren," the first one began, "you're 1-year-old today and I'm not there to see it. They won't let me see you, but I want you to know that I love you and I think about you every single day. I think about the brilliant, beautiful person you're going to become." I flipped through them, my vision blurring. "Dear Lauren, you're 5 today. Dear Lauren, you're 10. Dear Lauren, you're 16, and I wonder if you're anything like I was at your age." Did she write me every year? Did she try to reach me every birthday? And I never knew any of it. Then came the legal documents. A restraining order filed by Margaret and Charles Hale against Isabella Reyes. Isabella Reyes, Noah's mother. The woman in the photographs, my birth mother. The restraining order claimed she was unstable, dangerous, a threat to the child's well-being. It was dated 1982 when I would have been 6 years old. After that, a legal notice. Biological mother seeking contact denied. Parental rights terminated. Adoption sealed by court order. And finally, a letter from my grandmother Evelyn, dated just 3 years ago, a year before she died. If you're reading this, Lauren, then I'm gone, and Alexander Rhodes has done what I asked. I should have given you these papers years ago. I should have told you the truth. Your mother, Isabella, was extraordinary. She was brilliant and kind, and she loved you more than anything. But she was young and poor and alone, and when she got pregnant with you, she thought adoption was the right choice. She thought Margaret and Charles would give you stability, but after the adoption was finalized, Isabella started having second thoughts. She wanted to be part of your life. She'd gotten a good job, finished her degree, built a stable home. She asked for visitation rights. Margaret and Charles refused. They went to court. They painted Isabella as unstable because she'd struggled with depression after giving you up. They used her grief against her. They got the restraining order. They locked everything away and told you nothing. I went along with it because Margaret was my daughter, and I thought she knew best. But I was wrong, Lauren. You deserved to know where you came from. You deserved to know that your mother's brilliance runs in your blood. That your success isn't luck or delusion, it's inheritance. My stomach twisted violently. I looked up from the letter, looked at my parents. My mother had tears running down her face, but her jaw was set, defiant. My father looked furious and terrified in equal measure. "The woman in the photos," I said. My voice sounded strange, far away. "Isabella Reyes, Noah's mother." "My mother? They moved away the same week you locked the attic. You made them leave." My father exploded. "She had no right to contact you. We were protecting you from her instability." Alexander's voice cut through, cold and sharp. "Isabella Reyes had a PhD in computer science from MIT. She was my mentor when I was starting She was one of the most brilliant engineers I've ever known. The only thing unstable about her was her grief over losing her daughter. The daughter you stole and hid and lied to for 40 years, my mother snapped, voice shrill now. She was unstable. She couldn't provide for you properly. We gave you everything. Everything." I heard myself laugh, harsh and broken. "You gave me nothing but lies. You made me believe I was average. You locked away every piece of evidence that I came from someone brilliant because you were afraid I'd become her. You were afraid I'd leave?" My father shouted, his face red now. "You were supposed to be ordinary. You were supposed to be grateful. You were supposed to stay here and be a Hale and accept your place." The room went silent. Even Matt looked shocked. Lee had actually stepped back. In that moment, standing in the living room where I'd spent 19 years learning to be small, holding proof of a mother who'd loved me and fought for me and been erased from my life, something inside me finally, permanently broke free. I straightened. My heart was still pounding, but my hands had stopped shaking. "Well," I said clearly, "I'm not ordinary. I'm not grateful. And I'm not yours." I turned to Alexander. He was watching me with something like approval in his eyes, mixed with sadness for what I'd just learned. "Ready to talk investment?" he asked quietly. "Because HomeLink is exactly the kind of innovation your mother would have built, and I'd like to fund it properly." "Series B, full backing?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. We moved toward the door together. Behind us, my mother was crying openly now. My father was shouting something about betrayal, about family, about debts I owed them. Matt called my name. Lee looked stunned. Aunt Valerie was already on her phone. Pastor Ron was trying to restore order like this was a church service gone wrong. We stepped outside into the cold. December night. Snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the walkway on the cars parked along the street. I took a breath of freezing air, and it hurt and felt like freedom at the same time. Alexander was saying something about lawyers, about accessing more of Isabella's papers, about how my mother had left me something in her will before she died 7 years ago. I was trying to process the fact that Isabella was dead, that I'd never get to meet her, never get to thank her for the letters, never get to know her. And then a black sedan pulled up to the curb, expensive, quiet, tinted windows. It idled there for a moment, exhaust puffing white in the cold air. Then the back window rolled down slowly and inside was Noah Reyes. Not the 11-year-old boy I remembered, but a man now, grown and serious with his mother's eyes and an expression of deep concern. He looked at me through the window and I saw recognition and guilt, and something else I couldn't name. "Lauren," he said quietly. His voice was deeper, but I knew it instantly. "They're lying to you again." I froze. Alexander turned, his expression shifting to confusion. Noah opened the car door and stepped out. "The lies didn't end with your adoption," he said. "There's more. About your mother? About why she really died. About what your parents did to make sure you never found out the whole truth. You'd think finding out your entire childhood was built on lies would shatter a family completely. You'd think the truth would force conversations, apologies, maybe even reconciliation. But my parents didn't apologize. They didn't explain. They didn't reach out with shame or regret or even anger. They did something far simpler and far more devastating. They erased me again. Within a week of that Christmas disaster, I was blocked on every platform. My mother's phone number changed. My father's email bounced back. Matt stopped answering. Lee sent one message that said, "You've embarrassed this family for the last time," and then nothing. Radio silence. Complete and absolute. But it wasn't just silence between us. They went further than that. They told people I was dead. Not literally dead, but spiritually dead. Morally dead. Dead in all the ways that mattered to them. I found out through a former classmate who reached out on LinkedIn, confused and concerned. "Hey Lauren," she wrote. "I ran into your mom at the grocery store, and she told me you'd passed away last year. I'm so sorry for your loss. Except I'm clearly talking to you now. So what's going on?" I stared at that message for an hour. My mother was telling people I was dead. Actually dead? Gone. She was accepting condolences. She was playing the grieving mother. The lie was so enormous, so theatrical, that I almost had to admire the commitment. Pastor Ron got a different story. According to Lee, who couldn't resist giving me one final update before blocking me completely, my parents had gone to him in tears. They'd told him I'd chosen a life of sin and deception, that I'd aligned myself with dangerous people, that I'd rejected God and family and everything good they'd tried to instill in me. Pastor Ron, ever the faithful servant of their narrative, had declared me a lost cause. He'd actually said those words from the pulpit during a sermon about prodigal children who never come home. Someone recorded it and sent it to me. I watched it once, just once. Hearing him talk about children who reject their parents' love, who chase worldly success, who end up empty and alone, all while my mother sat in the front pew, nodding, was enough. The neighbors got yet another version. They were told I'd moved away and wanted no contact, that I'd made it clear the family was dead to me, which was darkly funny because it was the exact opposite of the truth. But the lie worked. People in Millfield stopped asking about me, stopped mentioning me. I became a ghost in my own hometown, a cautionary tale, a name people whispered about with pity and judgment. And my parents, freed from the embarrassment of having a daughter who'd actually succeeded, went back to their perfect life, their perfect family, their perfect lie. 8 years. That's how long the silence lasted. 8 years of holidays with no calls. 8 years of birthdays with no acknowledgement. I sent letters the first year, certified mail, so I'd know they received them. Every single one came back unopened. Return to sender scrawled across the front in my father's handwriting. I tried showing up in Millfield twice. The first time, I parked outside their house and sat there for an hour trying to work up the courage to knock. Before I could, my father came out, saw my car, and went back inside. 2 minutes later, both their cars pulled out of the garage and they drove away. They'd rather leave their own home than speak to me. The second time, I tried catching my mother at church. She saw me in the parking lot and turned around, walked back inside, stayed there until I left. I stopped trying after that. What was the point? Meanwhile, my life exploded in ways I'd never imagined possible. HomeLink took off after Alexander's investment. Series B funding came through at $30 million. We expanded to 12 states. Hospitals started integrating our platform. Insurance companies began partnering with us. Families sent me letters about how we'd saved their parents, their grandparents, how we'd given them peace of mind and precious extra time. The work mattered. The company mattered. For the first time in my life, I was building something that helped people, and I was being recognized for it. Series C funding hit at $90 million. We hired 150 employees. Forbes mentioned us in an article about healthcare innovation. TechCrunch called me a founder to watch, but success is strange when you have no one to share it with. Jace was there, my constant friend and advisor. Sienna still mentored me, proud in her gruff way. Alexander checked in regularly, not just as an investor, but as someone who'd known my mother, who understood what her legacy meant. And there was Noah. Noah had come back into my life that night outside my parents' house, and he'd stayed. We'd spent hours talking about his mother, about Isabella, about the woman I'd never gotten to know. He'd shown me photos, told me stories, filled in pieces of the person I'd inherited my mind from. But even with all of them, there was a hole where family should have been, a silence where my parents' voices should have been, even if those voices were angry or disappointed. At least it would have been something I thought about them constantly during those 8 years. I wondered if they ever thought about me. I wondered if my mother felt anything when she told people I was dead. I wondered if my father ever regretted his words that last night, about how I was supposed to be ordinary, supposed to stay in my place. I wondered if Matt ever defended me in private, or if Lee ever felt guilty. Probably not. They'd chosen their story and they'd committed to it fully. I was the villain in their narrative, the ungrateful daughter, the one who'd abandoned them for ambition and money and a life they couldn't understand. The fact that none of it was true didn't matter. It never had. Then came the morning that changed everything. March 14th. I remember because it was Pie Day and Jace had brought pie to the office as a joke. I was in early, 6 in the morning, going through emails with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My phone buzzed. A notification? I almost ignored it, but something made me look. Forbes, a new article published. 40 women who changed the future of healthcare. I clicked it, more curious than hopeful. And there was my name. Lauren Hale, founder and CEO of HomeLink. Third on the list? They'd used a photo from a TechCrunch interview. Me looking confident and professional in a way that still surprised me sometimes. The write-up talked about how HomeLink had transformed elderly care coordination, how we'd saved families thousands of hours and countless stress, how our AI integration was setting new standards for the industry. I sat there in my office, reading and rereading my name on that list, and I started crying. Not sad crying, not exactly happy crying either. Something in between, grief and triumph mixed together, because I'd done it. I'd actually done it. The girl my parents had tried to keep ordinary, the girl they'd told would never amount to anything, the girl they'd literally declared dead, had just been named one of the most influential women in healthcare by Forbes. And they'd never know. They'd blocked me so thoroughly they wouldn't even see it unless someone showed them. And even if someone did, they probably wouldn't believe it. Or they'd find a way to diminish it. To make it smaller. To make me smaller. That's what they did. I called Jace. I called Sienna. I texted Alexander. They all responded with congratulations. With pride. With celebration. We decided to throw a party at the office that evening. Champagne and catering and all 150 employees celebrating together. It felt good. It felt earned. I tried not to think about the fact that my family wouldn't be there, that they didn't even know, that, after 8 years, I'd finally stopped expecting them to care. I was getting ready to head into meetings when my phone buzzed again. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. No name, no previous conversation history. Just a message that appeared at 11:47 in the morning. Lauren, it said, it's Mom. We need to talk. It's urgent. I stared at the screen. My hands started shaking so badly, I had to set the phone down on my desk. Mom. After 8 years of complete silence, of returned letters, of being declared dead, of being called a lost cause from a church pulpit, now she wanted to talk. Now, 5 hours after Forbes published my name on a list of influential women, suddenly it was urgent. My chest went cold. Not with hope. Not even with anger, really. With something else? Recognition, maybe. I knew exactly why she was texting. I knew exactly what had changed. She'd seen the Forbes article, or someone had told her about it, and suddenly I wasn't dead anymore. Suddenly I was useful again. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. There was more to the message. I scrolled down, and attached to her text was a photograph. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel. When it finally resolved, my entire world tilted. Because the person in the photograph, standing next to my mother in what looked like their living room, smiling at the camera like nothing in the world was wrong, was someone I'd been told was gone. Someone I'd mourned, someone whose death had been reported to me 2 years ago by a lawyer I'd never met, in an email that had shattered me. The person in my mother's photograph, very much alive, very much present, was Isabella Reyes, my birth mother, the woman I'd been told died 7 years before I'd ever learned she existed. The photograph loaded on my phone screen, and the world stopped making sense. Isabella Reyes, my birth mother, the woman whose letters I'd read and cried over, the woman whose brilliance I'd inherited, the woman I'd been told died 7 years ago peacefully of cancer, before I ever knew she existed. Except she wasn't dead. She was sitting in a hospital bed, thinner and grayer than in the photos from my childhood, but unmistakably alive. Her eyes were closed in the picture, an IV in her arm, monitors behind her, but her chest was rising and falling. She was breathing. She was real. And my mother, Margaret Hale, the woman who'd raised me and lied to me and declared me dead, was standing next to that hospital bed holding a phone, taking that photograph to send to me. The second text came through while I was still staring at the first. She asked for you, my mother wrote. She woke up 2 days ago and your name was the first thing she said. She says she remembers everything, Lauren. Everything they did to her, everything they did to keep you apart. You need to come home. You're in danger. I read it 3 times. Each word felt like a separate punch. Isabella was alive. She'd been alive this whole time. Someone had lied about her death. Someone had kept her hidden, kept us separated for years, beyond the restraining order, beyond the adoption, beyond everything. And now, suddenly, after 8 years of complete silence, I was in danger. From what? From who? The questions spiraled in my head, each one more impossible than the last. I didn't respond to the text. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard to type. Instead, I called Noah. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. Did you know? I asked. My voice sounded strange, hollow. Did you know she was alive? There was a long pause. Yes, he said finally. I found out 6 months ago. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. Lauren, it's complicated. It's dangerous. They've been watching her. Watching both of us. I needed to make sure you were safe before I hung up. I couldn't hear anymore. I couldn't process it. I sat in my office with the door locked, staring at that photograph, feeling like everything I'd built, everything I'd believed about the past 8 years was collapsing around me. I drove to Ohio the next day, 10 hours straight, no stops except for gas. I didn't tell anyone I was going except Jace, who I made promise not to follow me, not to send anyone after me, not to interfere. I needed to see this myself. I needed to understand what was happening. The hospital was in Columbus, a 2-hour drive from Millfield. My mother had sent the address in another text, along with the room number and visiting hours. She'd also sent, "Come alone. Don't tell anyone, please. For once in your life, trust me." I didn't trust her, but I went anyway. The hospital was large and impersonal. Fluorescent lights and linoleum floors and the smell of disinfectant that made my stomach turn. I found the room on the 4th floor at the end of a quiet hallway. The door was partially open. I stood outside it for a full minute, trying to steady my breathing, trying to prepare myself for whatever was inside. Then I pushed the door open and stepped in. My adoptive mother was sitting in a chair beside the hospital bed. She looked old. That was my first thought. Margaret Hale, who'd always been so carefully put together, so concerned with appearances, looked old and tired and worn down in ways that had nothing to do with age. Her hair was grayer. Her face had new lines carved deep around her mouth and eyes. She looked up when I entered and something crossed her face. Guilt? Maybe? Or fear? Or both. In the bed, connected to monitors and IVs, was Isabella, my birth mother. She was sleeping, her breathing steady but shallow. She looked fragile in a way the photographs hadn't captured. Sick, like she'd been sick for a long time. I stood there staring at her, this stranger who was my mother, this woman whose genes I carried, whose intelligence I'd inherited, whose love I'd never known. My adoptive mother stood up slowly. "Lauren," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." I couldn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Isabella. "Why did you tell me she was dead?" I asked. My voice was flat, emotionless. I couldn't let myself feel anything yet, or I'd fall apart. "Who told you she died 7 years ago, and why did you let me believe it?" My mother's face crumpled. "That wasn't us," she said. "We didn't know you'd been told that. We thought." She stopped, swallowed hard. "We thought it was better if you never knew about her at all. After the restraining order, after we moved Noah and his family away, we thought it was over. We thought she'd given up, but she didn't. She kept trying to reach you. She kept fighting for visitation rights, for information, for anything. And your father, she looked at the door, nervous. He couldn't let that happen. You were finally becoming the daughter we wanted, quiet, obedient. Ours, if she came back into your life, if you knew the truth, we'd lose you." I stared at her. "You did lose me," I said. "You lost me the day you decided I was only valuable if I stayed small." She flinched but didn't argue. "I need you to understand something," she said quietly. "Your birth mother didn't abandon you. She was forced away from you. By your father? And by Matt." The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "Matt. My brother Matt. What did he have to do with any of this?" My mother sat back down heavily, like standing was too much effort. "Matt was 17 when we adopted you," she said. "Old enough to understand what was happening. Old enough to hear the arguments between me and your father about whether we should allow Isabella contact. And he was the one who convinced your father to file the restraining order. He was terrified that if you had 2 mothers, you'd choose her, that you'd love her more, that you'd realize our family wasn't enough." I felt sick. All these years, I'd thought Matt was just the golden child, just the favored son who got everything handed to him. But he'd actively worked to keep me isolated, to keep me from my birth mother. "Why?" I asked. "Why would he care that much?" My mother looked at me with something like pity. "Because you were smarter than him, Lauren. Even as a little girl, you were brighter, quicker, more curious. Teachers noticed. People noticed, and Matt couldn't stand it. He needed to be the best, the only one who mattered. So when Isabella started trying to contact you, when she started sending letters and requesting visits, Matt told your father that having her in your life would ruin you, would make you think you were special, would make you leave us, and your father listened to him? The door opened. I spun around. Matt stood in the doorway, still in his detective uniform, his face carefully neutral. He looked at me, then at our mother, then at Isabella in the bed. You weren't supposed to find out, he said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was almost apologetic, but it confirmed everything. I took a step toward him. You kept her from me, I said. My voice was shaking now. You were 17 years old and you convinced Dad to file a restraining order against my birth mother because you were jealous, because you couldn't stand that I might be smarter than you. He didn't deny it. He just stood there looking tired and resigned. I thought I was protecting the family, he said finally. I thought keeping things simple, keeping you from knowing the truth, was the right thing to do. I was wrong. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to hit him. But before I could do anything, Noah appeared in the doorway behind Matt. He looked between all of us, his expression grim. They're not telling you the full truth, he said. Lauren, your mother's hospitalization wasn't from an illness. It was sabotage. I froze. What are you talking about? Noah stepped into the room, forcing Matt to move aside. 6 months ago, Isabella started trying to contact you again. She'd gotten a lawyer, was preparing to challenge the restraining order now that you were an adult. She wanted to meet you. To finally tell you everything. Someone found out. Someone made sure she couldn't doubt my adoptive mother made a choking sound. That's not, she started, but Noah cut her off. She was poisoned, he said bluntly. Slowly, over weeks, someone was adding something to her medication. Something that mimicked a stroke, that put her in a coma. The doctors couldn't figure it out at first. They thought it was natural, but I had her blood tested privately. Traces of a compound that shouldn't have been there. Someone wanted her silent permanently. The room went completely still. Matt's face had gone white. My adoptive mother was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. I looked at Noah, then at Matt, then at my mother. Who? I asked. Who did this? Before anyone could answer, Isabella stirred in the bed. We all turned. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening. She looked around the room, confused, until her gaze landed on me. Even sick, even weak, the recognition was immediate. Lauren, she whispered. Her voice was rough, unused. My baby, you came. I moved to the bedside without thinking. I reached for her hand. It was cold and thin and trembling. I'm here, I said. I'm here. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't know. Her eyes filled with tears. They kept us apart, she whispered. For so long, but I never stopped loving you. I never stopped trying to find you. And now you need to be careful. They're not the only ones watching you, Lauren. There are others. People who don't want you to succeed. People who are afraid of what you'll become. Everything inside me froze. What do you mean? Who's watching me? But Isabella's eyes were closing again, exhaustion pulling her back under. Be careful, she whispered. Trust no one. Not even. She looked at Matt, at my mother, family. I stood there holding her hand as she drifted back to sleep, my mind racing. Poisoning, sabotage, people watching me. It sounded paranoid, impossible. But looking at Matt's guilty face, at my mother's tears, at Noah's grim expression, I knew it was true. Someone had tried to keep Isabella silent. And if they'd do that to her, what would they do to me? I left the hospital in a daze. I drove to a hotel nearby, checked in under a false name, and sat in the dark room trying to process everything. My phone buzzed constantly. Jace calling. Sienna texting. Alexander leaving voicemails. I ignored all of them. I needed to think. I needed to figure out who was behind this, who'd poisoned Isabella, who was watching me. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke to knocking on my door. Sharp, insistent. I checked the clock, 6 in the morning. I looked through the peephole. No one there. But on the floor outside my door was a package. Small, wrapped in brown paper, no return address. I brought it inside carefully. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. No letter, no explanation, just 4 words typed in the center of the page in bold black font. You're next. I dropped the paper like it burned me. My heart was hammering. Someone knew I was here. Someone knew where I was staying. Someone wanted me to know they were watching, that they could reach me whenever they wanted. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I needed to call someone, police, Noah, Jace, anyone. But before I could dial, I saw it. A new text message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. Check your email. I opened my email app with trembling fingers. The newest message had no sender name, just a string of numbers. The subject line was blank. I opened it. Inside was a single attachment. A video file? I pressed play. The video was grainy, shot from a security camera somewhere. It showed me walking to my car yesterday morning, Going into my office building, leaving the hospital last night, someone had been following me, recording me, documenting my movements, and they wanted me to know. The video ended with text appearing on the screen. We know everything about you, Lauren Hale, your company, your investors, your friends, your secrets. Stop digging into the past. Stop asking questions, or you'll end up like Isabella. Only this time, we'll finish the job. Please make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next twist. Drop your thoughts in the comments and give this video a like. It helps more than you know.